everyone, and welcome to Gorge Views. This is our second episode. In this episode, we're going to explore the gorge from the elevator by the Discovery Center, discuss the comprehensive plan in more detail, and learn more about the studio here in the NAC. I want to give a big thank you to everyone who watched episode number 1, and anyone that's watching this episode, please watch episode 1. It's well worth the watch. Gorge Views is on YouTube. Our channel is cleverly named Gorge Views, and wherever you see us on Facebook, just click on it. It's going to take you to the channel and hit subscribe. Please hit like. Please help us build our audience. Because once again, our mission here is to ensure that Niagara Falls is a city known for excellent views. There's reasons I have this city behind me, and I realize that's not Niagara Falls, New York. It's our view from Niagara Falls, New York, of Niagara Falls, Ontario. And one of the things that was striking in my military career was somewhere between the beginning of it and the end of it, Niagara Falls, New York lost its luster, lost its fame. When I was retiring, everyone's like, "Oh, Major Flack, what are you going to do with the rest of your life?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm going back home to Niagara Falls." Everyone looked at me like, I had no idea you're Canadian. And of course, I looked back at them like, "What you talking about? The waterfalls are in America. Niagara Falls is America." And it wasn't until Labor Day weekend 2013, I was still in the Army, but I returned to, had a real estate appointment to look at the building I ultimately ended up buying. And it wasn't until I got to the top of that building and looked over at Canada did I realize why everyone thought I was from Canada when I mentioned Niagara Falls. And this photo behind me, that's taken from my rooftop. That is my view of Niagara Falls here in Niagara Falls, New York. Now, while they have a great view on the other side, I don't think they quite have the same experience that we have. I think we have the superior experience. What I tell a lot of my guests at Gorge View is, yeah, please go visit Canada. A lot of fun, kind of go in the evening, and it's more nightlife there than our side at the moment. That needs a change. I think we can change that over time. But the waterfall experience, it's like 4 minutes. I go anywhere along their cliff top, I look at the waterfall and click, I'm done. Their behind the falls experience, I think, is the second best experience you can have the waterfalls. Cave of the Winds, definitely hands down the most inspirational. That's where you feel the power of the waterfall. Behind the falls, which is on the Canadian side, that kind of gives you the sense of scale. You're halfway down the cliff. You're set back a little bit, but you're against the largest of the waterfalls, the Horseshoe. You're not quite experiencing the power, but it is awesome because you do feel really small against that very large cascade of water. I'm disappointed that this swap has happened. We are Americans, for heaven's sakes. Nothing against our Canadian neighbors. They're wonderful. But there's only 30-some million of them. There's 20-some million New Yorkers. We're 10 times the size. We should have 10 times the experience on our side of the waterfall. And we do. It just doesn't look that way. Because you look at this skyline, and you look at our skyline, and you see we've kind of neglected and lost our way. And we got to find it back. And that's why this first series is more for the local audience things. Let's just jump into the gorge. I'm right here at the new point of access, the elevator by the Discovery Center. I like this place. One, just a few short years ago, to get to this point down in the gorge, you would have had to hike for a good half an hour. You'd go down a path to the north, zigzag back to the left, and you might not even find this spot. You might get lost along the way because there is one zone where it's a little bit confusing how you get from the path across this little meadow to the next path. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should go discover what I'm talking about. Get down in the gorge. Please get down in the gorge, people. I'm going to keep saying this all through the first series, get down in the gorge. But here's one of the reasons why. When I'm out to dinner, which quite often I am, and I'm usually down in the tourist zone for dinner, and I hear a tourist ask their server, like, "Well, we've been to the falls, and we've done the Cave of the Winds, and the Maid of the Mist, and we got our photos, and like, what else is there?" Way too often I hear the server say, "Well, you could go to Canada." Of course, this year that wasn't an option. You can go to Lewiston and maybe Buffalo, and we're pushing our own tourists out of our own area, and we're losing their money. Whereas we've got this experience for them. The gorge is there. These people, sure, they want to have a good time at night. So, a club experience or a good casino experience is a good night experience. But they've traveled thousands of miles to see natural wonder, right? They didn't go to Vegas. They chose Niagara Falls. They didn't go to Disney World. They chose Niagara Falls. They didn't go to Yosemite Park. They chose Niagara Falls. They didn't go to Grand Canyon. They chose Niagara Falls for this trip. And so we need to give them the maximum Niagara Falls experience they can have. And this side of the gorge has the maximum experience. So I want us locally to understand that. I want us locally to see that. I want it to be right off the top of their head. Oh, well, now that you did, the zone by the falls, you gotta go see the rest of the gorge. There's 4 miles of hiking, there's trails, there's elevators, there's stairwells, there's beautiful paths along the cliff top, and there's a whirlpool, there's a power plant with a free museum. All these little details are what should be rolling off the top of our local servers' heads when they get that simple question from a tourist, what else is there to do? Now, some people are like, yeah, well, that doesn't bring money into our economy. No, it doesn't. But sending them to Buffalo doesn't bring money into our economy either. Sending them to Niagara Falls, Ontario doesn't bring money into our economy either. What it does do is keep them for another 4 hours in a particular zone and then coming back to that same restaurant or a different restaurant in our city later that evening or the next morning and the next day. Because done right, it should take you 2 days to fully explore the gorge. And just because you find it boring doesn't mean our tourists do, because that's what they came here for, right? It is. Like I said, they didn't go to Vegas, they didn't go to Disney World, they didn't go to the Grand Canyon. They came to Niagara Falls to see as much of that as they possibly can. And they plan to spend 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 days, whatever they have already booked. And we want to give them the most time immersed in our experience as we can in that time, bar none. So back to the elevator. Now you can go down there in just 2-minute ride. Walk up to the door, go down the elevator, and walk right out there. And now you're immersed in the gorge. And it's a unique experience. It's a dystopic utopia. What do I mean by dystopic utopia? Well, it's dystopic because it's a site of tragedy. 150 years ago, we started industrializing the gorge. And by the 1930s, well, even earlier than that, by the 1920s, it was all factories from basically where the aquarium is today all the way practically to Prospect Point. And that's what you're seeing here, is you're seeing this early 20th century, early 1900s industrialization of the gorge. And then we started to move the other way. We started to deindustrialize it and started to revitalize it. And by the 1950s, the only thing left on the gorge rim was the original hydroelectric plant. And that's where the tragedy is. Over 50 years later, we don't see it as tragic because now we have a very pristine cliff top from the whirlpool all the way to the waterfall. But in 1956, the last thing standing spontaneously collapsed, ended in the loss of a life and $100 million in loss of infrastructure. And we had to rapidly build a new power plant to replace all that. And now what you're left with down there is these artifacts. But these artifacts are surrounded by this natural wonder. You have, there's geese and ducks down there, waterfowl. I have to apologize. I was down there this weekend and I had my camera out and I was really trying to get this conservation garden that they planted. It has some of the more natural plant life that's indigenous to the area. And this woodchuck, maybe it was a muskrat, it could have been a groundhog. I don't really know the difference. Pretty sure it wasn't woodchuck because it didn't have, pretty sure it wasn't a muskrat. It didn't really have that. They have a really unique tail and they're usually kind of bigger. But anyways, he jumps out of this bush. I'm so excited. I got my camera down here. It's a DSLR. It's not really good for video, but I had it on video. And so I'm excited, like, what great timing. Awesome. He just pops out to do a cameo. Can't wait to share this with my audience. So I'm following along. I'm not really looking at the screen. You can't see the screen anyway in the sun. It's like your phone. You can't see the screen in the sunshine. So I'm just following along with him. And he hops across the trail and goes down in this little hole. Like, that was so cool. He was so cute. He was so awesome. And he did it relatively slowly, but I'm like hurrying to get ahead of him so I can get more of a face shot of him. But it turned out all shaky cam and blurry, and I totally missed the woodchuck. So you get to hear the story, don't get to see the woodchuck. But what I do have for you are ducks and geese and all these other little these artifacts from the industrial age that's gone now. And it's ghostly in a way, but it's inspiring in a way because man fixed a mistake. You could not imagine in the 1920s that all of that industry would one day not be there. You know, someone who was like 60 in the 1920s would have looked at that and thought, this is so sad because it used to be so natural and nice here, and now we got all these buildings, and that's great. There's jobs, city's growing, and city was booming, but we lost this natural, pristine wonder that we used to have. Now we're lamenting the loss of industry and the loss of jobs and the loss of our economy, but we've got our pristine natural wonder back. And it's quite possible to monetize that pristine natural wonder, and quite frankly, we should be able to do a much better job of it than our Canadian neighbors. But kudos to them. They've done a great job of monetizing their view. Let's start monetizing our experience. It starts with sharing it. Let's kind of focus on how we start to better develop sooner rather than later. Let's go back and kind of focus on our comprehensive plan for a second. Now again, for the local audience, please read this document. In the last episode, I kind of left us with a critique of the vision statement, or the lack of a vision statement, and a strategic plan that really should start with a very clear vision statement. But don't get me wrong, this plan's not bad. It's got a lot of good material in it. The professionals who did all the homework and laid the foundation for the document, they did a good job of analyzing market challenges, analyzing some of the history, pulling out a lot of our strengths too, and laying down some strategies for us to move forward. And you say what you want about the Deister administration politically, or taxation-wise, or casino spending-wise, and a lot of other things. One of the things that was accomplished under his administration were, quite a few of what were called the big moves. And, the Robert Moses Parkway, which is really coming close to completion right now, and it's really shaping up. Another thing I did this weekend was walk that whole route and go into all these little new cutouts that they have. I'll save some of my critique and some of my excitement about it for a future episode. But that's another thing I encourage you guys to do. Get out there and see what, quite frankly, is a new Class A park that's shaping up right here on our western border, giving you even a better, more enhanced, wonderful experience with our gorge. But back to the comprehensive plan. Yeah. So while I'm going to be focusing more on the flaws of this plan, it is good. It is a good plan. It is our execution, it's our own actions that in large part are lagging. All right, and why? Why are they lagging? Well, frankly, they're lagging because of ignorance. And I don't mean that as an insult to us or you, the audience, locally. It's an observation. It's our own ignorance. And frankly, first it's ignorance of most of our population that the plan even exists. That's part of it. A lot of people don't realize this plan exists. Second, it's ignorance that many of us who do know it exists don't really know the contents, haven't read the plan itself. Third, it's ignorance of how planning and execution work by those who do know the content. So it's one thing to read a plan and say, oh, this sounds wonderful, or why aren't they doing it? Well, or even if you're like a member of the government, you become a director of one of our city departments. It's one thing to know the plan exists and to speak to it or about it, but executing it means you have to have an operational plan at your level that you're following that supports that strategic plan. So you have to understand planning principles. So ignorance of planning principles in and of themselves has us lagging. Fourth, it's ignorance in understanding the actual strategies in the strategic plan and who they are designed to work with symbiotically, or how they're designed to work symbiotically and synergistically. Another area of ignorance is our ignorance of prioritization or ordering of the strategies to achieve the optimal result. For example, we've done some of the big moves first, and that's good because they're foundational. You want those done before you do a few other things, but there's a few other things you need to do to capitalize off those big moves. Train station, for example, is a big move. Now that we've moved the train station, how is that actually helping us? Huge expense. Is it bringing us more commerce? Is it bringing us more tourists? Obvious answer right now is no, partly because of COVID, but partly what have we done to capitalize off of our own train station? You know, are we marketing specific to New York City and saying, look, hop on the train, be to Niagara Falls in 9 hours, don't need a car, just take the train, and once you get here, here's all the things you can do. It's also ignorance of our own strengths. And, you know, I've been pointing out the Gorge is one of our strengths. And you're going to see this in future episodes, holding some of these really great shots. But what you got to understand is every time you see me show you a photo of the Gorge, that's a photo from this side that is completely and utterly impossible to get on the Canadian side. When I say completely and utterly impossible, I mean just the way the terrain's shaped. You cannot see the waterfalls inside the Gorge in Canada once you get past a certain point, right? And if you're right down there where their Maid of the Mist is, sure. For every 10 feet you go north of the Rainbow Bridge in the Canadian Gorge, not that you can even go in the Gorge north of the Rainbow Bridge, not until you get really close to the rapids, but if you could go down there, if there was access on their side, you wouldn't see any waterfall. You wouldn't see much of the Gorge because it's just the way the terrain's shaped, the way it curves. Yet our side, you get to look all the way up it. It's amazing. And that's partly why we're motivated to have Gorge access on our side, because that access is worth it on our side, because the train lends itself to experiencing it. And that is one of our strengths. We have several others, and we'll get into those in more detail in future episodes. But what you got to understand now is, more than anything, we can talk about crime, we can talk about taxation, we can talk about loss of industry, we can talk about jobs, we can talk about this. We can lament so many things. But quite frankly, until we overcome our own ignorance locally, we are not going to make the level of progress we want to make. So that means you guys got to understand yourself. You got to understand your local economy. You got to understand how tourism economies work. You got to understand what you have to offer the tourists. You need to go experience these things for yourselves. And that's what we're going to try and do over time. So sorry for the lecture, guys. Sorry for the rant. But it's really important to pound this point home for you guys and to get you guys on board and get you guys on the excited side. That's what we want. Now, I believe we, the people of Niagara Falls, are totally capable of excellence. So the more we discuss a comprehensive plan, the more we read about it, the more we think about it, the more we draw attention to it, the more we revitalize, and the sooner we revitalize our own community. Now, in the last episode, I left us with the question of clarity on the vision statement. I shared how important vision was for a strategic plan. And now I want to explore that in a little bit more detail. The word vision appears from the acknowledgments of the document to the end at least 36 times. 36 times. Now, it sounds like a lot of times, but that's also over 120 some pages. But I'm going to show you a lot of the statements where visions appear. So please watch, please continue watching. But at any time you want please pause the video and read each of these little statements because it's important. It's going to educate you. It's going to erase a certain level of ignorance just reading these excerpts of the comprehensive plan. And I'm also hoping that you'll see a pattern. There are various patterns. And I can go into a lot of those in depth, but the one clear overarching pattern is we keep alluding to a vision that we never state. On the one hand, it's assumed that the thousands of residents of various backgrounds and various education levels and different interests over the course of 150 pages of words are going to come away with the same community vision. Is that a realistic expectation? I mean, we all know two people can read the same Bible passage that's a sentence long and come away with two different things. So it's completely unreasonable to expect thousands of people to share a vision from reading a rather large document. But if we want 1,000 people to march forward together and achieve something together, they have to share the same vision. That goes back to the importance of having a clearly stated, very objective vision statement. Now, our comprehensive plan, it does start with laying out the situation. So this is a critical flaw, all right? Vision is at the heart of strategic planning. Like I said in the last episode, I've mentioned it in this episode. I can't emphasize it enough. Now, of course, I'm biased towards military planning models. I mean, what retired major wouldn't be? But regardless of the level of plan, strategic, operational, tactical, we use the same basic process to develop our plans in the military. And every organization pretty much does the same thing in the civilian sector as well. All right, now, we in the military have a very standardized format for our plans. All right, it's called the 5-paragraph operations order. Now, I said we have the same format for plans, and then I called it an operations order. And it is, because once we write a plan, like, depends on the level that you're planning, but basically from a battalion and above planning level, that commander has a staff. That staff writes a plan for him. Then he says that's a good plan. He signs it and pushes out to everyone below him, and it becomes an order. Do this. Different in the civilian world. You don't publish plans and make it an order, and people aren't violating a law if they don't follow that plan. In the military, you are. So we have a little bit of advantage with plan execution. But our real advantage is our organization and our structure and our rehearsal of these things and our understanding of these things. So I want to share with you guys a little bit about these standard 5-paragraph op orders. Now, when I say 5 paragraphs, I don't mean it's just 5 paragraphs. A lot of them are from anywhere from 20 pages to hundreds of pages. I mean, invading Iraq, we didn't do that with 5 paragraphs. We did that with like 5,000 pages. So it does get complex depending on the complexity of the organization and the operation. But at the end of the day, there are 5 sections: the situation, the mission, the execution, service support, and command and signal. Those first 3, though, are the meat and potatoes of the plan. The situation gives you, here's where the enemy is, and here's what the enemy has available to them. Here's what we have, and here's what we have available to us. And our comprehensive plan does the same thing. Right in the very beginning, it lays out that situation. Like I alluded to earlier, the professionals who laid the foundation for our comprehensive plan did all that research for us. And they stick it right up front. Here's the situation in Niagara Falls. So in that way, we did a good job. All right, the second paragraph, the mission, that's always the shortest paragraph in any op order because it clearly states the vision, if it's a strategic plan. Here's where we see ourselves at the end of, 10 years of occupation in Iraq. Boom. And here's how and then we start to, in the execution paragraph, lay out the strategies. And that is why it's a critical flaw in our comprehensive plan. Great situation, good job, bravo. Execution, not bad, really good strategies, make sense. We need to understand those better. We need to erase our ignorance of them, our communal ignorance. But the critical middle paragraph, the vision statement, it's not there. So that leads us to another question. 10, 15 years, because, you tell me. Published the Niagara Falls Strategic Master Plan in 2004, but that's a culmination of a contract and consultancy firm's work, right? We tweaked a few things and changed the cover, and in 2009 passed it as policy. So that's like 10 years ago. But the basal document is 15 years old. So 10, 15 years into the plan, should we not be doing what in the military we would call it IPR, an in-progress review, right? So has the situation changed? Let's check. Is there something we've learned that or is there a new condition that we can exploit to achieve more optimal results faster? Is there a new challenge that is kind of making some strategy obsolete or not as synergistic as we thought it would? Do we have a new capability that didn't exist before that we ought to bring onto the battlefield to help us get there? So that's what we do in an IPR. Is it time we do an IPR? And if it is, shouldn't we focus on fixing some of the critical flaws? And that would be also part of the IPR process is, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this plan? What have we achieved and not achieved since we started? So that's a question for you guys to contemplate again. Again, go to the YouTube channel and hit the discussion chat tab or right under the video, leave me some comments. But let's start having this discussion, folks. It's really important. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at the strategies very specifically, and probably spend some time looking at the big moves and analyzing where we are in those and what we can expect to achieve from them. And I probably don't sound like it to you guys, but the big moves, I'm actually really excited about discussing those. What I've noticed in the community over the years is a lot of people don't understand the why of those. But when you understand the strategies, you start to understand the why. But if you don't understand the why, you're not going to get the return on that big move investment that those who told us to do the big moves anticipated we would get from those big moves, if that makes sense, right? So you got experts saying, these big moves, if you do these things, it's going to give you a big return. It's going to lay some foundation for you to really jump up a couple levels as a destination city. But in their minds, they also anticipated that there are other things we would be doing that work with that synergistically that I don't really see us doing yet. And part of it is the political will. And the political will to do these things, it isn't the council saying, let's do that. It's the people telling the council, we're prepared to do that, versus the people telling the council, well, that's not fair because you're ignoring LaSalle, which distracts us from this thing. If you understand the strategy, you understand LaSalle's never going to improve and is never going to be what you living in LaSalle want LaSalle to be until we have the resources as a city to fix the things that need to be fixed in LaSalle. And we're never going to get that money if you don't fix your economic engine. And although we bought the pieces to the engine, we haven't assembled the engine, and we haven't connected it to the drivetrain, and we haven't put tires on the car yet. So the car ain't going nowhere, so LaSalle's still going to be languishing, or Center City, or Hard Park neighborhoods, whatever piece, until you get certain things right. And the sooner you do it, the sooner you will fix LaSalle. But people sorry LaSalle, I'm not harping on you guys, it's just, I do notice LaSalle people often say, you're always ignoring LaSalle. And I don't hear that from DeVoe. But DeVoe probably likes being ignored because they don't need much help. Very good neighborhoods over there, and the streets are generally well paved. Kind of aside, and I want to start some Niagara Falls war, but it's important that we understand how, as one city, we put all this together. Certain things do have to happen first, and if they do happen, these other things happen faster and will ultimately happen sooner. But if we don't have the political will to follow the plan as a city, what are we following? we're following nothing. We're just always fighting each other and languishing down and muddling around in the mud. That's got to end. So, and that's part of the point that I want to bring out over the series. And I want to be so negative. I really don't. The big moves are big and they're really cool. And we're kind of there. So now we got to start capitalizing on them. Next episode, we'll talk more about that. But in the meantime, I want you guys to read more of the comprehensive plan. I want you to think about the comprehensive plan more. If you didn't stop the video and read all those little excerpts that talk about vision, please go back and read those and think about them. And if you have some comments, if you saw some other patterns in these little statements that include the word vision, please comment. In future episodes, I told you in the last episode, this would be a variety show, that we're going to focus really on these 3 strategies of what this studio brings to Niagara Falls and allows us to do, this experience that we can have in the gorge and share with our visitors and how important that is, and our own foundational documents and how our own ignorance of them, and we're overcoming ignorance, right? We're learning together about these documents. But how fixing all of that will help move the city forward sooner rather than later. So I hope you kind of enjoyed all the fun we had with the green screen, and we'll see you on the next episode of Gorge Views.